Hello, everyone, or howdy in this case, since we're from TAMU. So I am a computer science and statistics major here at Texas A&M, and I'd like to go over some of the classes that I took. So I will be upfront. I have taken some of the other classes for AP credit, and so even though those classes might be required for my degree plan, I did not take them at Texas A&M, so I can't really review them. So with that said, let's begin. So my fall 2020 semester is probably pretty typical for what you might see for ETAM, which is entry to a major. And so for entry to a major, you're required to take two science classes, two math classes, and two engineering classes in order to qualify for the entry to a major for engineering majors. And since computer science is an engineering major, I had to go through this. So the first set of science courses that are taken are Chem 107 and Chem 117. And so Chem 107 is the general chemistry for engineers, and Chem 117 was the general chemistry for engineers in the lab portion. So in the lab portion, this is probably most different than what is probably going to be done by modern um, engineering students, because these classes were done during COVID. So my first year was basically all online. And so with that said, it's going to be a bit different because we were just given the data. And so that probably made the labs a bit more easier since we didn't have the chance to like mess anything up. And so I'm actually kind of glad for that. And then for this other class, this one was probably easier than the AP Chem, which I took in high school. And so if you took AP Chem, you should be fine with this class. It goes way before, it ends before like acids and buffers. So a lot of the content is a lot easier than the AP Chemistry exam. And so that really prepared me for this class. And then I guess the only thing is there's probably bunch of problems on dimensional analysis. And so that's where you have to change units. So generally when you get into these science classes, you want to be careful of your units when you're doing homework assignments, because if you put in the wrong units, then you're going to get the problem wrong. But other than that, it was not too bad of a class. So I pretty much enjoyed these two classes. Next one is Clen 181. And so this is the engineering seminar. And I found this class pretty useful because they taught you a lot of tips and how to study and get used to college. And so I learned a lot of useful study tips. And probably one of the most useful things in here is there's an commitment calendar as well as a 5-day study plan for exams. And especially later on, even if you took AP credit, these planners will be really useful for studying for exams way ahead of time, because trying to cram all that information in is not good. So next is the engineering 102. This is the Python lab, I believe. And so here, engineers are taught how to code. And so I have taken AP computer science, so I was familiar with Java, but I wasn't really familiar with Python. And so Python was easier to learn than Java, but and I guess one of the more nicer things about this class is they go over unit testing, which really wasn't taught in the AP computer science exam. And so I really enjoyed that they taught unit testing and how to generate test cases for your code. And so I think that was really helpful. But yeah, this class probably will involve a lot of self-studying if you're not familiar with coding. So just be ready for that. And then this is listed as 2 credit hours. And so SEH is school credit hours, but that's just how much the course is charged for, but not actually how much it relates to like how much you're actually studying or how many class hours. Because this is actually like 4 class hours as a class that you have to attend. So like 2 lecture and 2 lab. Next is the Engineering 262, which is the entrepreneurship hour. And you learned how to, or well, this class was a fun elective class, and you basically get multiple speakers that come in over the course of the semester that speak about how to run a business and do it successfully. I thought it's very interesting. It's not really for me because I don't really plan on doing an engineering business, though if I ever change my mind, I think this class would be very useful. Next is, this is engineering 399. So this is the engineering honors dorm. For if you lived in the Mosier Hall, they put you in this class. This doesn't really do anything, but yeah, so there's not much to say about it because it's not really a class. Next is the engineering math 1. So This one was basically Calculus AB, or the first half of Calculus BC. And so I was familiar with the math. There were some harder questions with like the limits and some of the differentiating. So I would say it's a bit harder in that portion because the problems definitely got a bit more complicated. So even if you took calculus, what is it? Calculus BC or calculus AB, do be prepared because some of the problems do get more complicated than it, though I wouldn't say there's like any new confusing concepts. They just get a lot longer and a bit more complex sometimes. And then next is Perf 301, Performance in World Cultures. So you basically learn about different cultures over the world. The class is very easy, and yeah, there's not much to say about it. So it's a very easy elective. If you really like learning about dances and other cultures, this is probably a nice elective if you want to fill out your universal core curriculum courses. And so this semester was 14 credit hours in total. Then moving on to spring 2021, we have the first computer science course that I took, or first two. So this one is the Intro to Programming Designs and Concepts. And so this one is for credit hours. And so it's 3 lecture hours and 1 lab hour. And so this class is a bit heavy in the front of the semester because we had to do Zybooks over, I believe there were like 52 modules of Zybooks that we had to go over in like the first 2 weeks. And so you probably want to start this immediately once you get in the class, because that takes a while and you don't want to be bogged down by that. But other than that, this class was, I would say, a bit harder than Engineering 102 because you did start with C++, which introduces memory management, and that makes coding a lot more difficult. And I would say that I guess the fundamentals of memory management are kind of they make the coding more complex, and coding is also statically typed. And so in Python, things are dynamically typed, so you don't need to tell the types of your variables. But in C++, it's very strict about that. And so that's one of the differences. And so moving on, or well, to the exams of this class, I would say that the exams are pretty weird in this class. They were open note, but not like open internet. So if you had your notes, you could use them. But the second one was a take-home exam, and that was very weird. I think that one probably hurt a lot of people's grades though, because you'd have to unit test. I did fine on it, but coming up with the unit test for that exam was probably going to be difficult. But the first and third were more normal, like just coding questions and then a coding part at the end. Next one is very interesting because this isn't really like a coding class. This is more of a math logic class, but I still think it was pretty interesting. And there's a lot of fun things to learn about, especially because it wasn't a repeat of a programming class that I took in high school. It was actually new, interesting math concepts, like a bunch of how to make logical statements, probability, and then how to deal with, or how to deal with series and sequences and turn them into each other, which I thought was very interesting. The professor I took it with, Professor Kibo, he had open note exams. And so that made the class a bit easier. I ended up not doing as well as on the quizzes, even though I did well in the class overall, because I ended up making some stupid mistakes. But other than that, the class definitely wasn't hard. But even though the exams were open note, they were like process based. So even if you were scanning at your notes, that probably take up time and you don't want that happening. So here's the other dorm honors class, because I lived in the dorm, or the Mosher dorms, for the first year. Oh, I should also add that for ETAM, this class over here, CSCE 222, the discrete math or structures for computing, it is considered a math class for ETAM. So I took this instead of Cal 152 or Math 152, because I heard that class was a weed-out class. And so I figured I don't want to deal with that. So I took this class instead, and I think it works fine as a math class. And so the other two science classes are going to be the Physics 206 and Physics 216. They technically count as one science class. And so here, or well, Physics 216 is the engineering class and Physics 206 is the science class. So here, This, you deal with basic physics, except there is some calculus with it. So if you did this in high school, there's going to be some calculus, but it's not that bad. I did take Physics 1 AP, and I would say that that kind of prepared me for this, but as the semester got on, I did not remember most of those concepts from AP Physics, but I think the class overall wasn't too bad. I know this class could be hard for a lot of people, so I'd highly recommend going to office hours for both this class and this other class. So both Physics 206 and 216, because you're going to need to review those classes a lot. I did speak with my TA who is in the recitation session quite a bit for this class, and so that was kind of helpful for understanding problems. This was an honors class, so, or the main difference between this and the regular section was that we had to do the exam review, but I think that was actually pretty helpful. Oh, another thing, this class is actually split into two types, university and don't panic. And so university deals with actual numbers in the calculations, while don't panic doesn't. And so I ended up taking university, and they use what's called an LO system, or learning objective system. And so they grade you based off of whether or not you completed a learning objective. And so multiple questions can make up a learning objective. And if you get a certain amount of those questions right, you get the learning objective. And then your exam grade is based off of how many learning objectives you completed. And then what's really nice is that for the final exam, it's actually cumulative. So if you do, or if you get the learning objective right in the final exam, then it basically overrides the rest of the learning objectives, and it's basically marked as correct. So that's really nice. So I ended up actually getting a perfect score on the final exam. And so that really buffed my grade, especially after I didn't do as well on the third midterm. Then for the engineering lab, I did take this during COVID. So a bunch of the data was just given to us and we didn't actually do the lab. And so there's also the winter storm. So we only did 5 out of the 6 labs. So we did not do harmonic motion. And so, well, that made the labs a bit easier, but they were time intensive. I had to spend a lot of time in office hours with my TA or a peer teacher, because I always had questions about what needed to be done. And then for the homework section, it wasn't as bad, I guess, or the lecture portion. Yeah, this class is weird because it's both a lecture and a lab, even though it just says it's a lab. But for the lecture section, the homework wasn't that bad and the exam wasn't that bad. Though I will say that the exam for this class, it felt like really easy. And then I do peer teach it now, and sometimes students will come up to me with questions on the exam and I can't really answer them. But I noticed some of the questions and they look a lot more difficult than when I took it. So I'm not sure if they made the class harder when I took it like 2 years ago. But yeah, the exam was not that bad. It was like directly from the slides, and any problems that required computation did not take that long, but I'm not so sure now. The next is Stat 211, which is the Principle of Statistics class. So this is required if you're a computer science major and a statistics major. And so this class goes over basic probability distributions, mean, median, mode, probability sampling, and some of the very basic statistics stuff. And so I took AP statistics. The only difference between that class and this class is that this class has calculus, so you can't get AP credit for it. So, but the calculus wasn't that bad. It was a bit confusing at first, but eventually I think I got used to it. My professor, Professor Aberweiss, I believe is what it's called. I'm not sure, but it's been a while since I had him. But the class did give you a formula sheet, so that is useful. So you can put formulas on there since there are a lot of formulas. And so that helps with that, but you still need to know how to do the calculations. Other than that, it was a fine class. And then for Engineering 101, this is the honors seminar for engineering. And so if you're in engineering honors, you are required to take this class. And so this class is useful because it talks about research a bit, but I think Clen 181 did a lot more use for me because I took it initially and it dealt with a lot of topics that are similar to Engineering 181. But if you're interested in research, this class does cover how to get into that. Then I took 3 courses over the summer because I did not get an internship. So or well, I did do the SEC directed internship, but that wasn't really like a corporate internship. So we did do an interesting project with it, but if I did have an internship, I probably would not have done summer classes. But I did summer classes to try and get ahead. So next is linear algebra. And so this class was interesting because I took it over the summer online. And so it was a very fast-paced course, but the exams were actually open note. And so that probably skewed things a bit. I had Professor Cantu. I don't know if he does open note exams anymore, but yeah. Post 207 was also open notes. And so I had this with Professor Kent. And yeah, so these or two classes were both open note exams. And so for linear algebra, it wasn't that difficult. I don't think it was definitely a lot of new content to learn. So you had to stay on top of it, especially because you basically had class every day from Monday to Friday, but it's pretty bearable. This class was, yeah, you do have lectures for this professor, for Professor Kent. There are lectures, so make sure to pay attention to that because they do show up on the exam. What was interesting in this class was the professor was actually conservative, but the textbook was liberal. I believe it was made by the Texas Tribune. And so it was very interesting to see two different opinions. And then, but on the exams, the questions tend to lean more towards conservative in their answer. So if the professor said something conservative, then you'd have to answer that on the exam. And so that's just a heads up if you have any political leanings. This does with Texas state government. So just to be clear, so this goes over the Texas state government, the legislature, the governor, the judicial branch, and some stuff about politics and media as well. But other than that, not too bad of classes, in my opinion. Then for the second summer session, which is the last 5 weeks. So this is the first 5 weeks, and this is the second 5 weeks. So this is the second introductory statistics class. And so this dealt with more complex statistics topics. So how to transform linear models or transform nonlinear models into linear models, multivariate models, and as well as some more different types of distributions. There was a lot of calculus and a lot more the content got a lot more difficult, especially since the homework or the content was squished into 5 weeks. But I had the same professor as I had for Stat 211, so we were allowed a formula sheet, so that helped a bit. I will say though that oh yeah, this professor also did some extra credit. So I think he had like 3 points of extra credit if you filled out some surveys and did the syllabus quiz. So that's helpful. But yeah, so this class was a bit more difficult. The homeworks were also more difficult. They weren't like typical statistics questions, but I think they were more interesting because you had to logic your way through it. And so, yeah, because there weren't like simple A, B, C. You actually had to think about the question, and then it was a bit more complicated compared to Stat 211. But other than that, I say I enjoyed the class even if it became more difficult. So next is fall of 2021. And so after this, I got accepted as a computer science major. And so I did not become a statistics major yet. So most of my classes were computer science focused. So in this case, the first one is the data structures and algorithms class. So I had this with Professor Lupoli. And so all of these classes, except for CSCE 312, were online. And so this was the first in-person class I had, CSCE 312. But this one was a bit unique because I had Professor Lupoli. And so each week you had basically a lab you had to do with your teammates. And then, if I remember it correctly, yeah, they made you do a lab depending on, or yeah, going over the different data structures that were done. And it's basically assigned, and you have to record yourself doing it and then submit it for the professor to review. And so I guess that's what made the class interesting. The exams were graded pretty leniently because I remember misremembering how to do the process for one of the data structures completely. Like I just messed it up, but I think I only lost like 1 point on the exam. So the exams are graded pretty leniently. A lot of this is self-study because it's an asynchronous class as well. So CSCE 221 and CSCE 314 are both asynchronous classes, so you have to do some self-studying. But I think that was fine. There's probably less content learned compared to other professors because I've checked with other students. So that's just one thing to check out if you're looking to know your CS content, because this class is important for internships. The next is computer organization. I had this with Professor Kibo again because I enjoyed his class. And you do a lot of interesting stuff with the computer and learning how it's built up. And so you go from basic logic gates to basically coding an entire mini computer. And so I thought this class was interesting. The homeworks are a bit more difficult because they require a lot of exploration. He doesn't really cover the homeworks. A bunch of the content he covers in class are explaining stuff about the computer, but not really like the coding stuff necessary for doing it. You do like learn assembly later on. And so if you're interested in that language, you do learn that, though it's a bit difficult. Yeah, and the exams are open note, so they weren't that bad. I think I did a bit better compared to the previous class I took with Professor Kibo, CSCE 222. I think I just got better at question taking, to be honest. But other than that, not too much to say. The next, there's programming languages. So I also had this with Professor Lupoli. Over here, you learn two different programming languages. The first is Scheme. And so it's a functional programming language. And so it uses a lot of recursion. And so that might be difficult for a lot of people, especially if you did not take AP Computer Science, because no other class goes over recursion at Texas A&M, as far as I know. And so, yeah, recursion is something you might want to learn before you take this class, because when you do the labs, you're going to have to know how to do recursion. Otherwise, it's going to screw with your grade. But other than that, there were two exams. It's very interesting because you learn about how programming languages are set up. But so that's just a warning for that class. Next is the computer science seminar, CSCE 481. This is actually the upper level seminar. There are two seminars in computer science that you're required to take. But you basically have interesting speakers or videos each week. You come to class. This class was online, so that's probably one of the main things. I guess one of the things to watch out for is there are companies from the defense industry that do come. And I know that there are a bunch of people from my generation that are not comfortable with the defense industry. And so there was actually one student that came out and started getting into some tough dialogue with the speakers. And so you want to be cautious of that when you come to this class. Then there was the English 210, which is the communications credit for computer science. And so this dealt with a lot of different writing skills. And so how to write a resume, how to write a letter, how to do research. And so this class was pretty informative, but it was very time intensive. I think there was like assignments due on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week. So this class is not going to give you free time. So do be careful about it. Though I did take this asynchronously. So that did free up some of the lecture time, I guess, because I don't think the lectures were as that the lecture material wasn't that as important. I often found myself referring to the textbook a lot more. But if you enjoy lectures, then maybe don't do the asynchronous. But I did enjoy the textbook more than any lecture content. There's also some weird discussion boards, so I wasn't a fan of that, but I got through it. So that was my fall 2021 semester. Then my second semester as a sophomore is in spring 2022. And so here I took 14 credit hours. So the first class over here is ATMO 201. This is the elective science credit that I took for computer science. And so here you learn about the weather. I did take this course asynchronously, and the exams were open note, and so, but they were monitored by the Respondus lockdown browser. But I would say the questions were pretty easy. There were a couple of calculation questions, I think, but I don't think you needed a calculator for that. But other than that, it was a very interesting class, and it was also easy too. So I enjoyed that class because I learned a lot and it wasn't too bad. The next is the lower level computer science seminar. So similar to the other one, you basically come to each week. The professor does go over some mandatory topics, but there are also some speakers as well. There's tips on how to get internships, tips for grad school, and tips for research. So if you're interested in that, I'd recommend paying attention in this class. The next is CSCE 313. This is probably known as one of the more harder computer science classes at Texas A&M. I did take this with Professor Tyagi, but I did find this class also easier than a bunch of my other computer science classes. So I ended up using the weekends a lot to do the homework, but they're only like six homeworks, so I got through it pretty easily. I didn't find them too bad, especially because they give you comments and videos about what specifically you need to be coding. So that really helped out a lot. But the main hard part about this class is the exams. So they are open no, and you do have to go in person, and they're taken on campus. But the hard part is you need to make sure that you do the practice problems if you're doing Professor Tayagi's class, because the practice problems are what's covered in the exam. And if you skip those, then you're not going to be able to do them easily, because I think they're like labeled as optional content, but you need to do them for the exam. And so there's a lot of extra credit when I took this class, but I may have heard that there's not as much extra credit in later semesters, so do be careful of that. But the extra credit really helped because I got like a failing grade on the final, but I had a lot of extra credit banked in, so I was fine with not doing as well on the final. I did do well in the midterm though, so yeah, you're gonna have to do well at least on one of those exams. But other than that, it wasn't too bad of a class, though there is a lot of complex content taught in it, and the practice problems get pretty complex, so you should be familiar with how to do them. But it's very interesting because you learn how the operating system works and how the computer works at a low level. And so it kind of builds on CSC 312. And then you also learn how to make programs do multiple things at the same time, how to make programs communicate with each other and emulate a client and server. So very useful stuff if you're going into low-level computer science jobs. The next, there's Programming Studio, CSE 315. This course is listed as 3 credit hours. It should really be labeled as like 6 credit hours because this course takes a lot of time out of your schedule. Even though some of these projects are group projects, there's a lot of stuff you need to get done. And this basically prepares you for real world programming jobs or software development jobs. So you do a lot of programming projects, but there's a short time frame to do them in. So you need to make sure that you're spending enough time in this class. And so as long as you do it, though, it's an easy A, but it is a lot of work to get that A. I'd also recommend being careful with your group and making sure that they are staying ahead of schedule, because my second group or my first group that I worked on the second project with, we ended up falling behind a bit, and some of my group members did not stay ahead. And so I ended up having to grind up to like 5 a.m. one day to make sure that the project got done. And that was not good. The only saving grace was that this class was later in the day, so I was able to sleep in, but I did not enjoy that. I mean, it's very important for internships and real world job training, but this class is very time intensive. There should probably be a warning that this class takes a lot of time. It's also writing intensive as well, so you'll be doing a lot of writing. Next is CSE 436, which is honors or the human interaction, computer-human interaction. So I took the honors version of the class. There actually wasn't a difference due to the way that the professor taught the class. I did not have Professor Moore. I had the other Professor Kim, I believe what it was. I'm blanking out on the name, but it's the one that isn't Professor Moore. But this class was very weird because I don't feel like I learned too much from it. It was pretty much a blow-off class, but there is some group work they have to do. It's like a lot of kindergarten stuff. Really enough, this class also counts for the cybersecurity minor, so there should probably be some reevaluation over that, but I'm glad it was an easy class. But if you're looking to learn a lot, then this isn't a class for you. But if you want to have an easy breeze, this class is for you. Next, there's the summer session. So I did do some research with the sketch recognition lab. While doing this, I did not have an corporate internship for this semester. So over here, I did one class in the first summer session, another class in the second summer session, and then one class overall. So CSCE 411, this class was taught by Professor Jiang in the summer. And so there are no exams in this class, but instead there are projects. And the projects can take a while, and you also have to debug them to make sure that they work correctly. And so you should make sure to go to office hours if you do take this class over the summer. But this class teaches a lot of advanced algorithms and builds off of CSCE 221. And yeah, so you do learn to do that. A lot of it is not very easily intuitive, so you have to do a lot of thinking when you're doing the homeworks. But other than that, especially since the homeworks were only due like every few days, that made the class a bit easier. What else I have to say about this class? He does curve this class. From what he said, the top 50% get an A, and then the lower 50% get a B, as long as you've done all of your work. Otherwise, you probably get an F. But other than that, it was a fine class, but it was very difficult. I don't think I learned a lot of interesting things in it, especially because I found the complex too, I guess, foreign. And so I'm going to compare it with this class. So a lot of the topics were complex, but I felt like they had like some understandable basis. In this class, I felt like I had a hard time understanding what was going on. But in this class, while it was kind of difficult, it was very interesting to learn about. So Math 470, I did it for my math minor and the cybersecurity minor. And so it's communications and cryptography. And so you learn a lot about how to do various cryptography protocols and how to deal with secure messages. And so there were some interesting questions in the homework actually that dealt with this. And so that probably made it more interesting than your average math class. But what made this class more difficult is probably the exams, because you had to do a lot of 2-digit by 2-digit multiplications and divisions on the exam. And that screwed me a lot because you're not allowed a calculator on that exam. So I messed up. Make sure to check your work if you can, but if you're kind of slow like me, that kind of takes up time. But he does allow you to skip the final exam if you made at least a B in the class so far. So that's nice. I did take up the final because I wanted to improve my grade and I eventually got an A in the class. But if you're just fine with the B, you can definitely skip the final. So the professor was Professor Rojas, by the way, who taught this class. But yeah, it's pretty difficult, but pretty interesting at the same time. And the concepts didn't seem as foreign as in CSCE 411. I'm not sure if I'm using the correct word right, but I don't know. This class just seemed way more in grasp, even if it was more difficult. The next was ISM 320, which is operations research 1. And so this was done for the statistics degree. So I was trying to do a double major in statistics. And so this class was pretty interesting because you learn a lot about linear programming and how that's applied in the business world, and as well as industrial engineering. So it was a very interesting class. The exams were open notes, but the problems were very complicated and long. So if you were just relying on the notes, then you're not going to get very far. This actually did intersect with CSCE 411 and CSCE 221's content. So that was kind of nice since they basically reinforce concepts taught in either class. And so, yeah, the last part of this class is basically CSCE 221, the algorithm in data structures class. So you learn it's basically pretty easy if you've done that already. But the first half of it is very interesting because you learn a lot about linear programming and operations research. So I would say that I enjoyed this class. I enjoyed this class and this class, and I did not enjoy this class as much, but that's my review of those classes. Next, there's the fall semester. So this was the most credit hours I've ever taken. So let's go over the classes. So the first class I took was machine learning. And so I added it with Professor Chespari. We were allowed formula sheets on exams, which helped out a bit because there's a lot to memorize, because there's a lot of different machine learning algorithms. She made the math pretty easy, I would say, and she had some fun ethics at the end. So I think this class was very useful and very interesting. Next, there was computer honors research. So if you're in honors, you have to do research if you're in engineering honors. So for my research, I decided to do autograder feedback. and how to improve that. So I did you have to do like a literature review. And so there's like 50 sources you have to go through. And so there's a lot of writing this semester, and there wasn't as much coding done in this semester. You do have to do an IRB application if your work involves humans at all. So I would make sure to get that done as quickly as possible. But other than that, the more interesting part comes probably in the second semester, because you continue your research then. This is part of the URS program, the Undergraduate Research Scholars. And so they help prepare you. But you do need to make sure to attend all their meetings, because they have like a zero tolerance policy basically, unless you have an excused absence. And so you could basically get kicked out, and that's going to be bad for you. Next, I took my first graduate class, which is CSCE 735, Parallel Computing. So this class dealt with how to make computers do multiple things at the same time, which I thought was very interesting. You also learn about supercomputers. There is a supercomputing graduate course, but it's rarely offered. But if that class was offered, I'd take it because I found the topics very interesting. There are no exams in this class. Instead, there's just projects. So if you that makes things a lot easier as well. But the projects do take a while, and they're kind of hard to debug, especially since of the way that parallel computing works. So do make sure to start them early, because you don't want to do them late and then have to suffer the late term penalty. The next is Math 221, which is several variable calculus. I had this with Professor, what was it? I'm blanking on the professor's name. I'll search for it in the meantime, but this professor made the class pretty easy, I would say, on the exams. Um, she actually ended up going very slowly and covering a lot of exam problems. So I did take several variable calculus in high school, but there was no AP exam, so I didn't get credit for it. So that might have helped a bit here. But other than that, this class was very lecture important. So there's also a recitation session, so make sure to go to that and do the problems there. But the professor did go over the problems a lot of in depth. The homework was probably the more difficult part of this class, because a lot of it featured a lot more complex problems than what were shown in class. And so sometimes you had to go to the professor and ask about it. But other than that, it wasn't too bad of a class, and the professor made it easy. So let me search up the professor's name in the meantime. But I would say it's not, yeah, it was pretty, let me, think. What am I trying to say? Yeah, it was pretty easy on the exam portions. We did end up running a bit short of the exam content. Like I think we stopped short of like Green's theorem. So a bunch of that later Calc 3 content we didn't make it to. And so, yeah, if you're looking to do that, you might have to study that for other classes in advance. So I'd be familiar with that. But yeah, it's Professor Vorobets, the female one. I believe they're both married, so I had the Mrs. Professor Vorobets. So that was the professor for this class. Another thing to note is that engineers will take Math 251 or 253, and so that's different from this. The statistics major requires you to take the harder math courses, which in this case is Math 221, if you just join the major. And so if you're planning on doing a double major or joining statistics as a major, you should be aware that you'll have to take the harder math courses compared to engineering majors. Next is Stat 182, the Foundations of Statistics class. And so here, it's basically like the computer science seminar class. You basically have people come in each week. You do have to write a short essay, and then there are also 2 long essays you have to do, but they're not that bad, especially if you start early. And so as long as you make sure to do the assignments and turn them in, it's a very easy class. It's very interesting because you learn about statistics majors and how they do in the workforce, and how it's interesting how it differs from computer science jobs, especially because some of these people work in the government and do research. So yeah. And a lot of these students are like master's students or PhDs that come over. And so it's very interesting, the divide, because for computer science, you can basically get away with a bachelor's for most jobs. But for statistics, it's highly recommended to go up to the master's level. The next is STAT 408, which is the first upper level stat course I took. So this is the intro to linear models. And this basically covers all linear model content, as well as how to transform models that aren't linear into linear models. And the professor for this class, Professor Laha, she made the class pretty um, comprehensive, and she taught a lot of the problems. And so I did not have a lot of issues with this class, and the final exam was pretty easy. You are allowed formula sheets, so that helps out too. But of course, it's a process-based class, so all the calculations require time, and trying to search your notes for that or a formula sheet will take up time. So you want to make sure you're familiar with that. I will say though that probably one of the main issues is that the first exam will probably be difficult because you're not allowed a graphing calculator, but you have to do some calculations, which it's pretty weird to do with scientific calculators. I believe I had a TI 36 Pro, which allowed me to do a lot of the stat calculations pretty easily. So I'd recommend getting one of those if you can. Other than that, not too bad of class. Next, we're moving into the winter semester for 2022, 2023. I decided to do public speaking over the winter semester. And so not that bad of class. There are no exams, just discussion boards, as well as speeches that you have to give. You have to give 4 speeches: an introductory speech, yeah, there's an introductory speech, a persuasive speech, and then I'm blanking out right now, but there are 4 speeches. But yeah, the professor graded pretty easily, I'd say. So just make sure to follow the instructions and practice before you give a speech. That way you can get a good grade. But other than that, it's not too bad to get an A in this class. And especially since this is a transfer class, it doesn't really matter as long as you get at least a C. So yeah, this is required for the statistics major. You're required to have like 2 communications classes. So English 210 and Com 203 were mine for statistics. Then we had the spring semester for 2023. And so the first class over here is database systems. I took this class because I'm doing a JP Morgan Chase internship this summer, and it was highly recommended that I take this class for in the future, according to my interviewer. So I ended up taking this class. At the beginning, this class is pretty fine, but later on, after we reached normalization, I had Professor Langloss, by the way. After we reached normalization, this class became very unstructured. It became kind of weird, I would say, because it became progressively more, I guess, yeah. There are quizzes, so make sure to study frequently. And the exams, the professor does drop the final exam, so you don't have to take it. There's also a project, so make sure to stay ahead. I did manage to keep our group ahead, so that was pretty good. So, especially because the project ends nearest finals, so you don't want to be studying for both finals and the project, so start ahead while you still can. But yeah, the project is probably pretty useful in getting you into databases, but it's a bunch of self-studying as well because the professor doesn't really teach it. But yeah, this may be useful as a database project on your resume. Next is the high impact experience class. And so for this class, you are required to do it for computer science majors. And it's basically write like a 600-word essay answering various questions about in computer science experience you had. I decided to talk about my graduate class, CSCE 735. I wrote like a 1,000-word essay on it. Other than that, not much about it. It's a pass-fail class, so it doesn't really affect your GPA, but you do need to make sure to follow all the instructions on the papers. Next is CSCE 402, which is law and policy for cybersecurity. So it's a very interesting class. I had it with Professor DeWitt, but it was very interesting class, I'd say. You learn a lot about cybersecurity law, and she also gives a lot of interesting insights. There's a lot of writing in this class, but I'd say it's worth it because you learn about a lot of interesting things about cybersecurity law. At the very end, for the final exam, she does grade, or she does have an in-person exam. And so make sure to be taking notes. For the last month, I ended up forgetting one of the key concepts. So I ended up getting like a 75 on the final exam. It didn't matter as much because I did well in the other content, but that final exam, do make sure to study for it. And there's also semester papers, so make sure to be on top of that as well. But this class does end early, so I'm glad for that. This class ends before finals, so I'm glad for that. And this class also taught interesting content as well, so I'm appreciative of that, and it wasn't too difficult. So it's both interesting and easy. So, yep. The next is honors or computer and network security, which is CSCE 465. I took the honors version of this class, which is a bit different than the regular version of this class. So the professor was Professor Carlisle, or we call him the doctor. But this class goes over various cybersecurity topics, and it covers a lot of it. There are only 6 homeworks in this class, but they take up a lot of the grade. So you need to make sure to go to office hours and make sure that you're doing the problems right. I did that for every homework, except because you don't want to be losing points off of it. So it's basically the homeworks are basically capture the flag competitions for like the first 3 and then the last or the second to last one. And so what that means is you basically go and solve a cybersecurity problem by actually trying to hack into the problem server and trying to complete it. And so that was very interesting. The 4th homework was a Docker homework. So you had to run Docker on your computer and configure up firewall rules, but it wasn't too difficult. And the last homework for the honors class we did was we had to do a custom project. And so we did ours over cross-site scripting, which was very interesting. We wrote like 15 pages. There was no formal requirements, but I think we went above and beyond for this because we weren't sure what the requirements were. So yeah. Also, there's the exams for this class. They are pretty difficult. I got an 89 on the first one and then a 79 on the second one. And so do make sure to study for the exams and be familiar with the homework problems and how to do various calculations. I would recommend taking Math 470 before this class because on the final exam, there was actually a question that was actually answered in my Math 470 class, but I don't think we ever answered it in this class. So you had to actually think about it if you didn't take Math 470, but if you did take Math 470, the answer to that question was pretty easy. And so the exams are a bit difficult and there's a lot of content that needs to be covered. You are offered a calculator, so do be familiar with the math questions that you have to do with cryptography. But yeah, I would say it's a very interesting class, even though it's difficult. Then the next class is the second part of the computer science research. And so here I ended up making an auto grader that tested various debugging features. And so this semester was very short. So it ends in April, so that's pretty neat. But do make sure to stay ahead of those deadlines. And there's a lot of writing to do as well. So make sure you're keeping up on that. You're required to have at least 5,500 words, or I think either 5,000 or 5,500 words on your final thesis. So make sure to get that done. Make sure to also try and begin research early because you don't want to be waiting to the last minute. So yeah. Then the next class I did for the data analytics for petroleum industry certificate. And so as long as you take one extra class, you can actually complete this for the statistics major. And so one of the things is this class should probably be labeled as a 3 credit hour class. Like 1 credit hour is way too little for this class. Or well, I guess it only charges you for 1 credit hour, but in actuality, this class is like 3 credit hours because you basically go over like 2 textbooks worth of content and several hours worth of video going over everything in the petroleum industry as well as like the moral defenses for it. So there's a lot of content to cover. I would say that if you are, I guess, more green, you might find some disagreements in this class because there is one of the textbooks covers the moral defenses for the petroleum industry. So just to be aware of that. But if you're interested in the certificate like I am, then yeah, my dad was a petroleum engineer, so we had to learn what he learned. Or he was a petroleum engineering major. He did work in petroleum engineering, but now he works in IT. Next, there's statistical computing stat 404. This basically covers how to do R. I had Professor Schaefer. She was a very good professor because unlike the previous coding classes I took, each time in class she'd go over how to do various coding parts in R. And so that was very unique, and I really appreciated it for that. The exams are also open notes. Um, so do but so do make sure to take notes. But there is programming parts to it, so the notes may not be as useful. But for the the homework was also pretty easy. Um, yeah, she also taught a lot of interesting content that's specific to R, that's not specific to other programming languages. So I thought that was pretty useful as well. And next, I'll be taking the other STAT courses I need. I've completed all my computer science courses. So I'll be taking Math 411 and STAT 414, which are the math probability classes here at Texas A&M. They're basically the same class. I'm taking both of them to finish the math minor and finish the statistics degree. There were other math courses, but they didn't seem like as interesting. Like there's nothing like machine learning based or yeah. There was a um, scientific programming like class, but you need to take differential equations, and that did not seem like a fun class to take. So I decided instead to do Math 411. So next is the design experiments class. Apparently we do how to design experiments. I'm not really sure yet, I haven't taken it. But the other class that's useful for the data analytics certificate is the interdisciplinary data analytics practicum. And so this is the capstone for statistics. There's two capstones, but I'm taking this one for the certificate. Then finally, I'm taking a grad class, Stat 638, Applied Bayesian Methods. And so I thought this class seemed interesting from its course description. And so I'm taking this class and substituting it for Stat 438, which is the undergraduate Bayesian Methods class. And so that's it. And then for my final class, I'll probably be taking is Stat 415, which is Math Statistics 2, which builds off of these two classes, Math 411 and Stat 414. But other than that, that's all I have to say for now. And so thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.